Hi, for our next project, we're going to be working with abstraction, and you can use any technique that you want in this project, but you have to use an abstract subject matter, which means non-representational, can't be of a thing. It has to be basically shapes, gradients, those kinds of things. Um, Not something that you'd recognize out in the world, like a dog or a eyeball or something. Okay, those don't count as non-representational. And remember, non-representational and abstract are synonyms. So this is a Kandinsky piece. We can see that it is totally abstract. There's nothing in it that you could recognize from the real world. Reminiscent of things that you would see in the real world, but nothing is a thing. So here are three old paintings of mine. You can see they are some of them are more abstract than others. The only one that is fully abstract is the one on the far left. So the one on the far left would be applicable to this assignment because it is made entirely of shapes, colors, gradients. There's not a thing in it, right? It kind of looks like it might be something. You can interpret that yourself, but it's not an actual, there's no actual thing in it. In the middle, some of the patterns that I use are things. So you can see that there are some flowers in one of the patterns, a couple of the patterns in that middle one. So that one is not fully abstract. The composition is fairly abstract, but there are things in it, so that does not applicable. And the one on the far right, obviously, is a painting of foliage and kind of a graphic depiction of foliage around it. Okay, and so the only one of these three that would be applicable for this assignment is the one on the far left. So this is Lee Krasner. She was an abstract expressionist artist. She was also married to Jackson Pollock. Both of them at times used crystallographic compositions. Crystallographic compositions are ones in which the composition is equally heavy everywhere with the same kind of thing. So there's no focal point at all. Everything's everywhere. You kind of stand back and look at the whole rather than focusing in on focal points. And here is Jackson Pollock's work, similar. Everything everywhere, crystallographic composition. This is not what we're doing for the project. We're doing asymmetrically balanced abstraction. So these are not applicable to those, but they are both non-representational, so they are abstract. This is a color study painting by Albers, Joseph Albers, and you can see it has a very certain kind of mood in it, right? Keep this in your mind, and then we'll move on to this Rothko. You can see very similar colors. Both of these paintings are very much about color. Both of them they're not crystallographic because it's not everything everywhere, but they're still not applicable to the assignment because they are symmetrical. But this one is very different than the previous. This one seems to be more emotional, right? Both had colors on the warmer side, so you would think that these might be sort of uplifting. This one feels almost like, because of the wild brushstrokes within it and the kind of gritty gradients, it almost feels to me to be sort of highly emotional, maybe kind of burning in a way, that kind of feeling. Whereas the other one was a lot more controlled. And so remember when you're making artwork that you're getting a feeling across, even in abstractions, because of the choices that you make. Remember, form follows function. And so both of these artists chose very similar colors, and yet because of the brushstrokes, you get a very different sense from the two, right? Okay, now this is a Cecily Brown. We talked about her work before. It's really, her brushstrokes are really painterly, very kind of athletic brushstrokes, stuff everywhere. Just kind of wildly, kind of quick looking painting, even though it might not actually be that quick when she's making them. It certainly does have strong strokes in it. This painting is not crystallographic. It has sections that are kind of focal points. So I would say that the focal point would probably be this middle part, right? Because it is very different in color than everything around it. The stuff around it is mostly darker. The stuff in the middle is mostly peach, pink, white, some blues and greens. I mean, you get the idea. The lighter section is right in the middle. So this one is not really applicable for this project either, because the focal point is right in the middle, even though it is an abstraction. The fact that it's right in the middle and it's centered means that it's not really an asymmetrical kind of balance. It's more of a symmetrical balance, right? The sides and the top and bottom in terms of the shapes are fairly similar, okay? The focal point's in the middle. So with a asymmetrical composition, generally the focal point will be off center a little bit. And you will be watching a second video today about asymmetrical balance, and that one is not necessarily about abstraction, it's about asymmetrical balance. But for this project, you're going to be making an asymmetrically balanced abstraction. So you're going to take a bit from both lectures. Okay. Now, I'm going to talk about how to go about designing an abstraction. I think a lot of people are afraid to do abstracts because they don't know how to design one. They don't know how to design a composition. And when they are able to kind of cling to subject matter, then they don't necessarily think that it shows as much, that they weren't paying as much attention to composition. Both in abstraction, your composition is really the thing that shines the most, right? And really, we do see your composition regardless of whether you're doing a representational or non-representational thing. So it's really important to be good at designing compositions and really take it into account before you start painting, no matter what you're painting. But anyway, I have a trick here for anyone who is afraid to design an abstract. One thing that you could do is create, this is what my mom does. This is one of her paintings. This one's huge. This is an abstract piece. And what she did in creating this is that she started by making a mural, sorry, not a mural, a collage that was based on a composition of another artwork that she liked. So she found an artwork that she liked already that existed, and she sort of broke down, and it might have been representational, probably was. She really likes Baroque and Renaissance artwork. But anyway, she broke down the composition of that original artwork to its simplest kind of shapes, and then she did a collage of things that had texture. So she found things like a photograph of a rock, photograph of kind of dirt texture, photograph of like whatever kind of textures, like cottons or whatever, and she cut those into the shapes for the composition that she had already picked. She collaged them on, and then she based her painting on that. So she still had something that she was looking at. She was looking at her collage that was compositionally based on this other painting. So that's one thing that you could do. So, for example, you might take this painting by Caravaggio and say, oh my God, what a great asymmetrically balanced composition this is, right? You could take this, break it down into the simplest shapes so that you no longer see human beings or hands or drapery. You rather just see sort of shapes, right? And you could play with what kind of textures you'd want in those shapes, what kind of colors you'd want in those shapes. But you would kind of start with this idea of how the composition would be. Here's an artist who works with art historical concepts that are representational and then makes abstract artwork in response to those. And so looking at this, you can see that it is abstract, it is asymmetrical. So this is applicable for the assignment with Timothy Apper, my student. But we can see that he designed this based on a trope in art history, Western art history. Do you recognize what this looks like? Okay, I'm going to reveal it now. Here we have this trope called the Odelisk, and the Odelisk is a image of a woman in a harem laying down, kind of waiting to, I guess, have sex with somebody. And so this is, there are hundreds and hundreds of odalisks. So one on the bottom right is the Manet. That one is famous because it was the first one in which the woman didn't look excited at all to be in the, in the brothel. She looks kind of irritated and like she's confronting the person who's coming in. You can see that these paintings have all kinds of problems in terms of racism and sexism. First of all, usually there's some kind of black servant in the background in a lot of them, like the bottom right matinee. The other two don't. That sometimes is not included in the paintings. Also, obviously, the male gaze. These are kind of women available for sex to a wealthy man, and also they are very Orientalist, which is a term for when someone from the West kind of exoticizes the Middle East or Asia. And so you can see that this is an idea, like a Western person from about 100 years ago's male's idea about what a harem would be like. The one on the upper right is by the painter Ang, and it's actually Josephine, Napoleon's wife. She commissioned this portrait done of her to give to her husband as a gift. So these don't hold up so well now, and probably never should have, right? But they are a big part of art history, particularly Western art history, and that is what Timothy App was responding to here. You can see that he kind of took away all of those kind of problematic features of an odalisque and kept it to just the shapes of the compositions that you tend to see over and over. A lot of odalisques have very similar compositions from one to the next. Okay, in case you're curious, I also did an odalisque painting at one point, and this is not applicable to the assignment because obviously it is fairly symmetrical in terms of balance, and it is also not abstract. You can see that there's a snake in it or a snake body in it. So in mine, I wanted to do an odalisque because I wanted to make a response piece to it. And so this one, the figure reclining is a snake body, not a real snake because it doesn't have a head. It just kind of parts of a snake spewed out across in a horizontal manner. And it's supposed to be sort of seductive and attractive and repulsive and disgusting at the same time, sort of like the way that those paintings are, because those paintings are kind of lusciously painted and beautiful in terms of the brush strokes and all the kind of blingy stuff in them, and the kind of sensuality, but they're also kind of disgusting for all the reasons I already talked about. And so in my piece, I included the snake in place of the woman, and the patterns in the background are all Italian medieval patterns, but they do look sort of like they might be from the Middle East, but they're not. So Venice was actually a big port city in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, and so lots of things were traded back and forth between the two cultures, and so these were designed by Italians to look Middle Eastern, based on things that they had gotten through the port. And so I chose these patterns to talk about the idea that these odalisque paintings are really just kind of Western people's kind of imaginations of the Middle East, and not anything that actually comes from the Middle East, And so that's now getting back to the topic of this homework assignment. As I mentioned, I want you to paint something that is abstract and has asymmetrical balance. So this is finally something of mine that would be applicable to the assignment. I showed you a couple of examples earlier, but this one totally fits the bill. So this could be something that I would turn in to myself for this project. This is an older painting of mine. You could see that it is not symmetrical, that it's balanced, and that it is non-representational, aka abstract. So this would work for it. Now, more about why this is asymmetrically balanced, you will find out about in the next lecture about that you're going to watch. Okay, another way, so we were talking about how to get inspired to make an abstract. So both of these pieces are not abstract. The one on the right, as we mentioned earlier, is one of mine, and you can see that it has flowers in it and it has stars. So it's not abstract entirely. But it is an example of how if you see some kind of texture or something that you like, or composition or color that you like in another artwork, you can incorporate that into your abstract piece as a way to help you make decisions. And so I always liked this painting on the left. And so I love, this is painting mountains and trees in the foreground and a stream. This is a Japanese print, and there are lots of paintings in the tradition of these kind of craggy mountains, and I always love those paintings. I just like the texture of the kind of cragginess and the way that the compositions can pop up really abruptly with very mountains that are very kind of steep above trails or water. And so I wanted to make a painting that didn't actually have the same composition as that, but incorporated some of the features. And so you can see in my painting, I'm going to circle it, there are all kinds of little slits where you can see through one pattern to another pattern behind it. And so it incorporated some of this cragginess that you would see in one of these kinds of paintings. And here, these are really old paintings. This is a really old painting of mine, but you can see I took inspiration for this piece on the bottom right, which is fully, completely abstract and asymmetrically balanced. And I took my idea for its composition from this upper left comic book image. And so you can see the character getting whacked. And so I did a little model. The upper right was the next thing I did to try to work out the composition. You can see that I decided that it was too square and I wanted it to be higher. So then in the next stage, actually painted the underpainting, the bottom left, which is more vertical, less square, and then I painted the patterns on top of it, and you get the ultimate painting. Okay, here's another example of that. You can see the image on the far left is actually my ex-husband's illustration. He is an illustrator and animator in the UK, and I was looking at a lot of his work back when we lived together, and so I loved the explosion coming out of the door. Just love the composition of it. And so you can see I made a model in which I worked it out a little bit, and I didn't end up liking it so much, and then I kind of reverted back a little bit closer to his original for the actual underpainting, and then I painted patterns on top of it. All right, so this is not an abstraction, this piece, the ultimate piece that comes out of this, but it does have a good example of how you can collect ideas from different places and bring them together, okay, for a work that you're designing. So in the upper left, I love these colors, kind of the tannish gold, the blue and green that you see in there. I also really like the composition in the upper right. It's actually a photograph of a cave with water in it, and there's a bunch of seals on a rock. Really hard to see because it's so small, but I just found this photograph and I adored the photograph and the composition of it, and so I wanted to make a painting with a composition similar to this seal cave photograph, and I incorporated a bunch of caterpillars in it because this piece was about kind of a biographical piece about kind of transitioning over time into different stages of one's life. And so here I picked these 4 patterns because they were ones from my parents' house, the far 3 ones on the right, and the one on the left is a pattern from my own sofa, and I had to stitch the images together to recreate the pattern. Okay, so ultimately it turned into this painting. You can see the colors are very similar to the upper left painting in the previous slide. The composition is similar to the cave, and the patterns are from those things that I showed you. And so basically this is a way to stitch things together to create your ideas for textures, for compositions, for colors, for an abstraction. Okay, This is not abstract. It's just an example of how you can pull things from different places. Okay, now please watch the video about how to balance an asymmetrical composition.